Alright y'all, Decompose is just a broken skill. It doesn't work in any way that you think that it works. It is significantly more powerful than you think it ever possibly could be. It also is absolutely useless because it doesn't trigger anything. And it just turns out that the more that I look into this skill, the weirder and weirder that it gets. So I'm going to try to make a very quick compendium of all the stuff that you need to know about this skill, because you could be getting double your lucky proc hits, double your essence generation, tripling your corpse production, and also not generate corpse, not trigger lucky hit, and also not trigger Abhorrent Decrepify or reduce your cooldowns. This skill is wild. If you haven't seen my most recent video, I was trying to optimize the Infinimus build, and I realized that Decompose would be a great tool for building with X falls, because Decompose is considered to be a damage over time effect, and it can generate corpses faster than Sever can, so it should be an auto-include on the build. The reason why it's so true is because the logic of channeling skills is actually very interesting when it interacts with the lucky hit of X falls. For whatever reason, a channeled skill can only proc in effect once per second. So even though it does damage twice, it can only happen once per second. This is a good way of balancing channeled skills because some of them have really high lucky hit chance. That being said, if you were to spam cast this skill, it considers each application of this skill as its own 1 second window for all intents and purposes. So you can effectively double your total lucky hit chance. And just to very quickly show it, while channeling the skill, we should expect X falls to happen once roughly 30% of the time per second. So over 4 seconds, you would expect to see it trigger at least one time, but given enough applications of the skill over a long enough time, you'll eventually see X falls trigger. And typically if I faff along long enough, it would have occurred by now, and I'd have a really good segue to finish channeling there. Now, as you can see, it's very inconsistent, but if I were to spam cast this skill, so literally clicking over and over and over again, you'll notice that all of a sudden our X falls is triggering much more often, as well as the application of stun from crippling darkness. Because again, it can only trigger once per second, but since I'm spam casting it, it can trigger multiple times per second. So just in that short window, you saw how much more effective it was. Now, I've run into a bunch of interesting problems. The first one, most notably, that it does not trigger Hewed Flesh. Now, if I were to clean all this up just for people who didn't see yesterday's video, which I highly recommend watching, because I do go in to how you can actually maximize Infinimus with a bunch of different ways and what I'm currently doing for the build, which I think is very important. I'm also updating the max roll guide and literally had to interrupt updating it to come test more stuff on Decompose because I was thinking about incorporating it into the guide. But I'm going to leave hands off for right now once you see all these various problems that I'm talking about. Oh, and don't mind that timer right above us right now, we'll get to that in a second. But if I spam cast Decompose, I never hit the 1.5 channel length that's needed for the skill to naturally generate a corpse, and you'll notice that I'm just not generating corpses at all. Now, if I were to put Hewed Flesh back onto the build and continue to spam, you'll also notice that I never generate a corpse. Now, I proved this in the last video, but it works outside of here as well. On regular monsters, it's not just a problem with the training dummy. I promise I went and did my due diligence, but this was one of the interesting issues that we ran into. Now, before I get into the next issue with it, the thing that basically makes it a completely dead skill, let's actually talk about something very cool with how Decompose works with spamming. You can basically double your essence generation output. Well, double the generation from the skill, not from every source, but you can get significantly more essence per second by spam casting the ability. And let me go ahead and show you that. So we're just going to go ahead and channel and see what the output looks like for our essence generation. Just get a rough estimate of how long it should take, but it should be somewhere between 7.5 to 8 seconds to completely refill my orb of 121 essence. But let's get completely empty here. Wait for it to get here again, and then let's channel. And I'm just going to pause it when it looks like my orb is completely full. So there's going to be a little bit of human error here, right? But 1, 2, boom. 8.45 seconds, a little bit slower. I actually have more essence than I did previously when I was first testing this, but that's the benchmark, right? 8.45 seconds. Now, let's see what happens when I spam cast the skill and try to determine if there's any noticeable difference there. Here. So this is me actually casting the button myself as opposed to using an auto clicker. That was 6.06 seconds. Let's just run it back one more time just for the people who aren't going to believe the outcomes, making sure that there's as little human error here as possible, right? So let's empty our orb completely, wait for it to get just up enough again, and then do this, and then boom. just channeling normally like you would, and I'm going to use an auto clicker just to show you the difference. And there, we're full, a little bit early, but 8.44 seconds again. Pretty conclusive there. And now let's use the auto clicker just to minimize human error. Wait till it's completely empty. So it's an auto clicker. Look ma, no hands. But 5.73 seconds. Interesting, right? Spam casting the skill, even though it's supposed to be essence generated per second, is drastically increasing our ability to fill our orb. Okay, cool. So we have the sandwich. The skill's broken and doesn't actually trigger corpse generation from Hewed Flesh. The skill can actually be spammed to nearly double your essence generation from the skill use itself. So there you go. That's a cool little thing for people out there using Decompose. It doesn't work with rotting to actually increase how many instances of channeled essence you get back. So that's actually kind of good to know, right? If anybody was expecting this to work better with this aspect, that's just off the board. But here's the problem, and if you had a really keen eye, you actually might have noticed it previously. But we have not been reducing any of our cooldowns from Abhorrent Decrepify. I'll go ahead and take off X-Fall's ring. We can leave this on here. But let me curse these targets and then spam cast Decompose, and we're going to watch our Bone Storm cooldown to see if it ever goes down. Alright, we have multiple targets all being hit at the same time. All of them are decomposed. They're having Crippling Darkness applied to them. I'll recast Decrepify. And we'll sit here, and we'll wait. Remember, Decompose actually has a really high lucky hit chance, and typically Abhorrent Decrepify triggers off of everything. It even triggers off of thorns from your minions. But I could sit here for the full 30 seconds of Bone Storm, and it would never work. For whatever reason, Decompose, while spamming, doesn't reduce cooldown. Now, what if I were to channel it? I can go ahead and cut to the quick here. It also doesn't work for channeling. No matter how many targets there are, no matter how often you test it, it doesn't trigger Abhorrent Decrepify. Decompose is not considered to be hitting the target. Similarly to how it isn't hitting the target for infection, something that's been applied this entire time in my vampiric powers and has never triggered. This is what initially set everything off for me. I thought this would work almost certainly, but it doesn't. Now, I hear you. The test dummies originally were broken and they weren't even generating corpses normally like they should. So I went outside and I tested as well on the good old-fashioned wolves, bears, and birds of eastern northern Kiovashad. And it doesn't work there either. Because I want to do my due diligence, I want to make sure that it's not the system I'm using for the testing, but instead the results that are actually proving that a bug exists. So testing it out on the wildlife just northeast of Kiovashad, just like in the old days, it turns out it doesn't work there either. Now, I can still trigger everything else like I normally would. Heck, even Metamorphosis on my evade skill is triggering different lucky hit abilities, most notably from Lidless Wall and generating corpses and applying Abhorrent Decrepify, stun, as well as cooldown reduction. But Decompose doesn't, so herein lies the problem. Decompose is actually even stronger than I thought it was before, because you can literally double your essence generation from the skill. And for people who are doing the math, you need to remember that we have natural essence generation as well, so if my character wasn't generating any essence at all, I'm positive that the total output increase that you would see would be double, as opposed to only about 60 to 70% increase there. But it doesn't trigger Abhorrent Decrepify, it doesn't trigger Hewed Flesh. Luckily, it does trigger X-Falls as well as Crippling Darkness. We have another really interesting set of addendums and asterisks to put at the end of lucky hit abilities and what they can and cannot trigger. Now, for people who are wondering, I have tested it out against generating primary resource as well as chance to slow, and it does trigger both of those. So it's looking like any base lucky hit effect type ability in the game, Decompose works with it, but the moment that you add caveats like damage or hit checks, it's no longer working. So it's very interesting. I'm not exactly sure what the exact takeaway here is, but we still can't rely on Decompose because the ding dang thing is bugged out of its gourd. Now, here's what I need from you all. Here's the help to the community that I'm looking for, because I'm already reporting this to the MacroBioBois. I'm going to have them test various things, and maybe they've already come across stuff like this for the other classes, but Does your Whirlwinding Barbarian trigger every lucky hit ability? Does your Channeled Skill Sorceress as well? Have you sat down and really cataloged what does and does not work for it? And have you just been assuming that parts of your build work because of happenstance or other things are triggering stuff when you think your primary channeled skill is? I'd love to hear from you down in the comments below. Similarly, in the Discord, I've been trying to aggregate all of the biggest nerds in the community to come and share their experiences, their testing, their know-how, and their knowledge. So if you haven't joined there, please feel free to go do so now. The link is in the description. As always, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button to the channel. I'm trying to bring you this level of like nitty-gritty, deep, hard-hitting, scientific approach to video gaming. So if you mess with this, if this is your vibe, click that button. I'd hate for you to miss out on any of the videos. Likewise, if you haven't thrown a like onto the video yet, that's the best way of telling YouTube that you want to see more of this content out in the algorithm, and we can get it spread out to as many people who may benefit from this video as possible. As always, thank you so much for watching this video. I truly hope that it helped, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.